You are listening to Radio Ramadan 365 podcasts.
Assalamu alaikum, Shaikh Sahab.
Wa alaikum salam, sir.
We are starting with chapter 21, Intent, the Universal Language of Sincerity. In this chapter, you talk a lot about the contradiction that many of us often face, which is knowing a lot of Quranic stat, but clearly being sincere. With this background in mind, what do you mean by keeping it real?
So when I speak about keeping it real, I'm kind of referring to a congruence between what you know, what you say, and who you are. You know, many of us know Quranic ayat, we can quote hadith, we can speak very beautifully about tawakkul and about sabr and about shukr, but knowledge is not sincerity. I mean, knowledge can become decoration. It can even be, protection for my sense of identity. I'm the one who knows all this stuff. You can hide behind correct language, while your inner state remains untransformed. I mean, and we know this is true. The contradiction appears when there's a gap between articulation, what you say, and actuality. The tongue saying, Allah is sufficient for me, but the heart's in a state of panic. The tongue says, I forgive, but the chest is tight with resentment. The tongue says, all is from Allah, but my mind keeps on accusing the other for having caused my misery. So to keep it real means to acknowledge where you actually are. If you're afraid, you say inwardly, I'm afraid. If I'm jealous, well, there's jealousy here, I acknowledge it. If your tawakkul is weak, don't pretend that it is strong. Allah doesn't need your performance because He already knows your state. I mean, He invites your honesty. So sincerity begins when you stop pretending to yourself. And I mean, I think that's quite a remarkable attribute that we as human beings have, that we can actually be dishonest with ourselves. We lie to ourselves. Keeping it real, this is not about disrespecting the deen. It is about refusing to use the deen as camouflage. It's about allowing the Quran to illuminate my deficiencies rather than to decorate my identity. There's something profoundly clean about saying, I know what is right, I know what is true, but I'm not living that yet. That humility is closer to Allah than a polished speech that hides this sort of inner contradiction. So intent is the universal language of sincerity, because intent cannot be self forever. You may fool others and convince yourself temporarily, but if you sit quietly, you will know whether you are kind of acting to serve or acting to impress or to avoid or to control. So keeping it real means aligning your action with your deepest and most honest intention. It means reducing the gap between what you profess and what you practice. It means letting the deen work on you rather than using it to work on others. So it's simple, but it's not easy. You say less, you pretend less, you notice more, you correct quietly. You correct yourself quietly. And when your outer and your inner begin to match, I mean, even imperfectly, there's a relief, because it's the relief of no longer maintaining a pretense. That relief is sincerity. And that's what I mean by keeping it real.
Okay. Very good. You also talk about the need not to just know, that there is an intelligent creator, but to witness it. What's the difference?
I think that to know that there's an intelligent creator is a conclusion, something that you have deduced. To witness that there's an intelligent creator is an experience. So knowledge is conceptual, and it sits in your mind, it sits in your thoughts. And you can argue for it, you can defend it, you can construct proofs, you can win debates, you can hold a position, you can challenge positions. But witnessing is existential. I mean, it's what you experience in the world. And it changes how you stand in the world. It's not something that you argue, but it's something you see. So, I mean, a person, you can know in principle that Allah is Ar-Razaq, the provider. But when your salary is threatened, then you're in a panic. That is knowledge without witnessing. The idea that Allah is your provider hasn't yet filtered down into, first of all, perception and therefore lived experience. Another person may know the same theology, but when the provision tightens, something in them remains steady. Not passive and kind of irresponsible, but firm. They act, but they don't collapse inwardly. And that steadiness that I'm describing, this is like closer to witnessing. This is like a knowing, not a believing. So knowing that there is an intelligent creator means you believe the universe is not random. Witnessing means you start seeing intelligence in whatever happens to you. When your plans are disrupted, your knowledge says, Allah's wise. The witnessing says, there is wisdom here, even if I can't see it. And when you look at a tree, knowledge says, Allah created this. When witnessing says, this thing that I'm looking at is so extraordinary, it is so complex, it is right now, it has to be sustained by an intelligence which is beyond me. I see intelligence in this thing. So difference is not subtle. So the difference rather between these two isn't subtle because it affects your emotional life. Knowledge leaves you in control, whereas witnessing humbles you. Knowledge leaves you as the commentator on reality. Witnessing makes you the participant and the viewer of something really vast. Knowledge can coexist with anxiety. Witnessing melts anxiety, softens it. So to witness doesn't mean that you walk around in mystical ecstasy. It might mean some of that too sometimes, but it means that over a period of time, your perception matures and you begin to see that more is going right than is going wrong in every moment. And that going right that is going wrong, you cannot account for rationally. It stays surprising, it stays miraculous. And you begin to notice that you're alive despite incalculable odds. You begin to recognize that what you call coincidence, orchestration. So witnessing is the movement from I believe to I see, I perceive. It's a shift of theology to perception. And that shift changes everything because you start to witness, and because you start to witness, rather, your trust force becomes natural. It becomes experience.
Well, then the next one is I thought I was better because I washed my backside with water.
Right.
This is about how.
Yeah, so I mean, that clearly refers to this issue of our significance, and
Yes.
as Muslims, and that the deen sort of sets us apart from other people, and that we're the select, we're the chosen, and everybody else is like the kind of the sort of the lesser humanity. I mean, before we even go into this,
Yeah.
there's in my life, I
Yes.
have yet to find any example of of the claim to being the chosen, being the special ones, not
Yes.
ending up in a curse for both the person who makes the claim and for everybody else.
Mm.
I mean, let's just consider for a moment the whole sort of the Israeli thing now, and the whole issue of the Jews being the chosen, and the effect that has on the world. How everybody who's not part of this status of the chosen are now kind of lesser beings that can be sort of exploited and abused legitimately. You know, I mean, I come from uh, uh, my background is in apartheid South Africa. You know that
Mm.
people, because of their literally the pigmentation of their skin, were considered to be the elect, the chosen.
Yeah.
And you know what kind of a nightmare that produced for the rest of South Africans. So wherever we have the sense that we are special because of our group affiliation makes us special, this never turns out well. Hmm.
Mm.
You know, so I mean, this kind of arrogance that Muslims have, that that we are significant because of how we do things. I mean, this does not speak to the highest parts of our nature. I mean, it speaks to the more base and less interesting parts of our nature. You know, this is exactly how how the nas works. I mean, if you wash with water and somebody else with paper, that does not give you license for some kind of a hierarchy to appear in your mind. I'm cleaner. I'm more correct. I'm closer to the sunnah. You know, um, because in the process, something far more unhygienic and poison has slipped into your consciousness now. And that has nothing to do with the clean backside. It has to do with a sense of superiority. Um, it is one of my earliest observations when I first became Muslim, how much effort goes in to Muslims articulating their superiority over others based on Islamic practice. So I remember many years ago, I mean, I was still working at the Chamber of Mines. So you're talking about the mid 80s. I
Mm.
went to Jummah one day, and
Mhm.
the man who was delivering the khutbah spent half his khutbah speaking about having witnessed a man walking down the street eating a sandwich, and how this was an indication how fallen that man was and how superior he was as a Muslim, because he would sit down to eat and not walk down this. I thought it struck me as unbelievably medal. I mean, is your sense of identity so vulnerable that you've got to pick on something so stupid to indicate your superiority? You
Mm.
know, so the tragedy is not that we act according to the Sunnah. I mean, not that we are washing with water. I mean, that obviously is a beautiful thing, but the tragedy is that we're using the Sunnah to inflate ourselves, to consider ourselves to be more significant than other people. And obviously, traditional Muslim communities are not immune from this. In fact, sometimes they're more susceptible to this because it is all about correct outward practice. So it's very easy that we confuse form with rank. You begin to measure piety by some visible conformity. So, the person who's got the right length of trouser leg, or the person who eats correctly, or the person who's got the right length of beard, or or even the person who pronounces the Arabic correctly or performs correctly. This house somehow indicates election, a spiritual election. But I mean, when this is the case, this isn't spiritual election. This is the deen dissolving into arrogance. So it becomes a vehicle for arrogance, because it becomes a vehicle to claim the significance of the self, the love, this love of refinement and of sort of religious refinement, very often gives us the kind of quite sophisticated material to dominate. I pray more than you. I know more than you. I follow the sunnah more precisely than you. I'm people of this tradition or that tradition. I'm better. That's the whisper behind all of this. I'm better. I mean, the Quraysh didn't reject the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam because they didn't know ritual. They rejected him because their pride was threatened. Pride is the oldest disease. Iblis did not deny Allah. He compared himself with people. So we can see how problematic this is. I mean, if you can be outwardly more disciplined and yet inwardly much more diseased. So washing with water is not the problem. The problem is the comparison. It is the moment you derive a sense of identity and superiority from your correctness, then that act is contaminated. It's no longer useful to you. When your identity is strong, then boundaries are policed. Policing easily becomes judgment. Judgment becomes exclusion, and exclusion becomes an excuse to dominate. But when deen is not seen to produce domination, when it is seen, it is not. When it is seen to produce mercy, then it is a product of it is an expression of humility, not of superiority. If washing with water makes you gentler, more grateful, more aware of Allah, then it's purification. If the washing of the water subtly makes you despise somebody else, you're not purified at all. You're basically you're performing your ego. You're performing your sense of identity and nafs. The irony to all of this is that the one who truly understands the Sunnah becomes less and less concerned with ranking themselves against others, ranking others. They become more and more concerned with their own sincerity. So the sign of maturity is not stricter comparison; it's softer judgment. And when Sunnah refines behavior, then purification refines the heart. But without the second, without taska kind of refining, clarifying the heart, then the Sunnah just becomes a weapon. It's a weapon to say, I'm more correct than you, I'm more superior than you. There's no sincerity in that. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. Because I've heard the comment multiple times, because I do this, or how can they, it's literally positioning yourself that you're better than other people just because you actually you do that. Sheikh Saab, thank you very much for that.
Right.
Jazakallah. That's chapter 21 concluded.